The impoverished CARICOM nations set to get rich.
The government will now have billions of US dollars to spend.
Our GDP will change 10 times over. That's the worth of what Exxon has for Guyana.
But will this world-class oil find benefit locals in Guyana?
We have a problem in Guyana with management. We have so much here, and people here are struggling.
We journey to the capital, Georgetown, to ask the Minister of Natural Resources, Raphael Trotman. And later,
we have oil.
A seeming win-win for Guyana and Exxon Mobil.
On Guyana, we're very excited about it.
But will the largest oil company in the U.S. be a good partner for this South American nation?
Exxon has a terrible track record of dealing with countries and exploiting them to a very high degree.
Is a low-skilled country like Guyana any match for Exxon Mobil? On this episode of 18 Degrees North. Hello and welcome to 18 Degrees North. I'm Zara Burton, reporting from the shores of Georgetown, Guyana, the only English-speaking South American country and a member of CARICOM, the Caribbean's Free Trade Agreement. You know, by all estimates, this country, its economy is tiny, about $3 billion US. That's only about 15% of its neighbor by sea, Trinidad and Tobago. Despite being rich in things like bauxite, in gold, in rice, in sugar, the people here, they're poor. The per capita income is about $3,000 US a year, and the unemployment rate, especially among youth, is nearing 40%. But you know, something happened in 2015 and again in 2016, in fact, twice. Working offshore from where I am, about 120 miles out at sea, Exxon Mobil, they found oil, lots of oil, and it's worth many multiple times of Guyana's GDP. The first announcements came from the PPP government during the 2015 election campaign. Despite the last PPP administration overseeing growth of between 3 and 5% each year, the opposition, led by David Granger and Moses Nagamutu, convinced the electorate it was more capable to handle any oil find.
We have oil, but thank God that this disclosure is made on the eve of the elections so that your new government with clean hands can take control of the oil sector.
The message of the opposition resonated as allegations of corruption had plagued the PPP. Tons of the country's main export, gold, had been smuggled out of the country without royalties being paid over to the government of Guyana. Millions in state funds were said to be missing or unaccounted for in several major projects. So much so that under the PPP, Transparency International ranked Guyana on par with Russia and Sierra Leone, the most corrupt of CARICOM nations outside Haiti. The result, most Guyanese remain poor. Drugs at local hospitals are in short supply, schools are under-resourced, road conditions are poor, murders and armed robberies are commonplace. The population of mostly Indian and Afro-Guyanese has remained stagnant at around 750,000 over the past decade, as more skilled Guyanese head to countries like the US, Canada and England in search of opportunity. But only a month after celebrating 50 years of independence from the British, came a second confirmation from Exxon Mobil. It had found as many as 1.4 billion barrels of oil in the Liza oil field, the world's largest discovery in 2 years. Exxon Mobil's stock rose 1.4%, CNOOC Nexen, its Chinese partner in the project, went up more than 1%, and Hess, its US partner, jumped 4%. Guyana was the talk of the energy world. Here's Exxon's then CEO Rex Tillerson and now former U.S. Secretary of State speaking at one analyst meeting inside the New York Stock Exchange.
On Guyana, we're very excited about it.
At 1.4 billion barrels, pumped over decades and calculated at $50 US per barrel, Guyana's oil is worth US $70 billion, roughly 20 times Guyana's GDP. This is enough to revive the fortunes of Exxon Mobil, stung by years of declining production and enough to make the average Guyanese hopeful of becoming stinking rich. So will this be the thing that finally turns Guyana's economy around? I sat down with Raphael Trotman, the Minister of Resource here in Georgetown, Guyana, at 7 degrees north and 58 degrees west.
Imagine that government or successive governments will now have not millions but billions of US dollars to spend on social development, on infrastructural development, on building roads and highways and bridges and ports. While we can only dream, I think in a few years' time we'll be able to say for sure how transformational this will be, but we know for a fact that it will be.
And when do you actually start?
We expect to commence production in 2020.
What is the quantity of proven reserves at this point? Now that we've had 3 announcements, Liza, 1, 2, and 3.
We believe in this one field that we have at least 1 billion plus barrels of oil, and that's a lot of oil by at $50.
That's more than Trinidad, isn't it?
Right now, yes. Trinidad has, of course, had more, but they're now on the lower end and they're focusing more on natural gas. We anticipate that it will take us about 20 to 25 years to empty that well.
Over that 20-year period, how much is Guyana expected to make of that money?
We hopefully will garner about 15 to 20 billion from that, because some has to go into exploratory costs.
Okay, just for our viewers, you and I were talking ahead of the break, and essentially what you said to me is that 75% of the money goes to the investment recovery.
Yes.
And then 25% is split between Guyana and Exxon and its partners.
That's right.
Now, after that period of recovery, you are expecting that profit oil would be split between Guyana and Exxon and its partners, 50-50.
Right. Yes.
When do you expect that we'll go from cost oil
to profit
oil?
I would anticipate about 5 to 7 years, because in the initial stages we'll be producing at 100,000 barrels per day, and then the expectation is that we'll at some time within 24 to 36 months move to 200,000 barrels per day.
What if oil comes down again to the 20s? Have you and Exxon kind of worked out what is your break-even point?
I believe that we've accepted that the price at about $35 to $40 is a good price. Not the best price, but we can go to production at about $40.
How are you going to make sure that Exxon isn't gypping you? And because Chad, I think in a situation that I read about recently, Exxon Mobil was being fined because billions of dollars, in fact, because they weren't paying over enough royalties.
The responsibility lies with government to ensure that it has auditors, accountants, economists. And where we lack the expertise, we're going to retain experts.
What about this expertise or lack thereof that seemingly plagues Guyana? A lot of the skills are in other countries.
We've already seen an interest on the part of Trinidad and Tobago. I have been to Trinidad and I have spoken, and the former Minister of Energy has visited, and we are in the process of working out a MOU between the two countries about development and how we could partner.
Venezuela, Petrocarib, a lot of Caribbean nations have benefited from that agreement. Do you believe that Jamaica will be able to buy oil, let us say, at a below market rate?
We're not sure whether we will be actually refining and producing oil, and therefore I'm not sure that we can actually trade or sell oil to our neighbors or to CARICOM at preferential prices, but I'm sure that Guyana will play its part.
The United Nations is supposed to make a ruling on that dispute between Venezuela and Guyana. What if the dispute is not in Guyana's favor?
There was a dispute which we believe was settled by an arbitral award in 1899, so we don't have a dispute. There's a controversy which has arisen from Venezuela's, in a sense, resurrection of an old claim. Insofar as what happens with the United Nations, those matters I prefer to leave to our foreign minister and our president. We believe that the oil is ours, and we believe that it's our right to develop our resource.
Venezuela, they have the world's largest oil reserves, and yet Venezuelans cannot put food on the table. How are you going to guarantee that Venezuela is not going to happen in Guyana?
It's known as the resource curse, or the Dutch disease. This is where you've gone completely or too far into a dependence on one product, and that's petroleum. So that when the oil price collapses, your entire economy goes with it. We are now finalizing the policy and the framework for a sovereign wealth fund, for a fund that will help with stabilization when prices change, benefit sharing for environmental protection.
What happens if there is an oil spill?
Under our agreement with Exxon, they're expected to be the first responder to a situation like that. Second response is, of course, the SEDEMA, which is the CARICOM or Caribbean Emergency Management Disaster Agency. The U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. government will step in to give support.
And the U.S. government has put this in writing? I
can't say that it is in written form, but I can say that we have already started to benefit from Coast Guard training. It's ongoing.
Which country would you say is eyeing Guyana and saying, I need to be in here?
I think the U.S., but not because of Exxon only. I mean, it has been the dominant country in this hemisphere. I would say followed by Chinese.
Chinese? Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. What are the Chinese wanting to do?
Well, they've always shown an interest in manufacturing and giving support services. And we, as is the case in Jamaica, we have had a long history of good relations with the government and people of China, so we don't say no to them. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much,
Good.
sir.
Thank you very much.
Since our discussion with Minister Trotman, there have been several more major oil discoveries in offshore Guyana. A New York Times article quoting experts says Guyana could have more than 4 billion barrels, which at today's prices, then about $50 a barrel, would be worth more than $200 billion US. As of April 2018, prices had increased to the $60 per barrel range. Coming up on 18 Degrees North, will this new oil wealth reach the average Guyanese?
We have so much here, and people here are struggling.
We want to see local benefits from oil and gas.
That's next on 18 Degrees North.